Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He restores my He leads me in the path of still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and my staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house forever.
Good morning. Good morning. Morning, church. How are we going? Wasn't that little guy awesome? Can we give him another hand? Surely goodness. I love that thought. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me, pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Those of you who have been here the last few weeks, we've been in the middle of a series, and that's why we read that psalm, because the series is on Psalms, and it's called The Soundtrack of Life. And we started off talking about how soundtracks remind us or take us to a place. They fill us with joy and emotion. They remind us of important events, moments, things in life. And Psalms is one of these. Singing and songs and poems are also real. They're true to our experience. They're true to our life. And we've seen how, as we've tracked the progression, Psalms is kind of divided up into 5 books. And each week we've kind of taken a psalm from one of those books, or those chapters, or those sections in the book of Psalms. This week we're in section 4. Last week we heard from Kira where it was about coming home. The first week kind of painted 2 roads, 2 paths that we see in our human experience. One is a path of life that leads to good things. The Bible described it like a tree planted like the river. The other is a path that leads to destruction and death. And we've also all kind of experienced that in some kind of way in our lives. Then the next one had looked at far from God, being far from God, what life is like when we choose that other road, when we go far from God. And often it's quite a painful, a sorrowful experience, but God is still there with us. God is still there pleading with us and talking through us. Carl took us through that. And then last week, Kira spoke about coming home, how we enter and how we come into the presence of God, because that section of Psalms was all about how we come back into his presence. And what I want to talk to you about today is finding the song again. Once, maybe that has been your journey, your experience. You were faced with these choices. You then lived a life apart from God or walked away from God. But you've kind of come back home. You've kind of entered in again. And it's what is finding that song? Or what does that song sound like for you? I remember growing up, there was a soundtrack that I listened to as a teenager. And many of you might know it. This is probably going to age me, but any of you familiar with the TV series Dawson's Creek? Dawson's Creek, okay. And there was the soundtrack that came out of that. And I think, I don't know if I actually listened to it, but just all the people around me were listening to it. And one of the songs from there, it was a song called Feels Like Home. Feels like home to me. Yeah, I can hear them singing it here. And have any of you had that experience? Have any of you gone far away, come back, and that feeling when you walk into home again? That feeling when you come to the familiar, that feeling when you come in and it's like, yes, this is right. This is where I belong. This is how life is meant to be. This is where things are good. I love seeing our little boy Noah. He's only 10 months old. Hasn't had much experience of going or coming or life. But whenever we go out somewhere with him, Liz and I have noticed that when we walk back through our front door and Noah looks and sees his toys on the carpet, looks and sees the familiar couches, looks and sees the other things that are around, he just instinctively gets this big smile on his face, his arms start flapping, and he just feels joy. Liz and I love seeing it, love observing it. That whenever he comes home, it's that familiar, that joy, that place of peace, that place of familiarity, that place of comfort. This is what this book of Psalms, the fourth chapter, the fourth book, tries to celebrate, tries to conjure up and remind us of. And so we're going to look at one psalm in particular, and it's Psalm chapter 91. And I'm not going to have many slides up today because we're going to be in our Bibles, and so it's on page 356, Psalm chapter 91. This is the shortest sort of segment or shortest division in Psalms. It's from Psalms 90 to Psalms 106, only 16 different songs, different poems in there. The first one of these, Psalms 90, was written by Moses. This is a song of Moses, but we're going to be in Psalm 91. And the author, the Bible doesn't tell us who the author is or who the author was. Many think it could have been Moses, and there's many ways it makes sense that it is Moses. He wrote the one before. And Moses certainly would have experienced some of these things. But as we get into it, what I'm going to do, I'm going to invite you, you can either follow in your Bible there, or just listen. Because the Bible was written to be heard. And even these songs, these poems, they're written to be heard. So I'll read it, just sit there, listen, take it in, and then we'll pull it apart and see what God is teaching us or wants us to understand about what it means when we're back in the house, what it means when we're home, what that looks like, what that can be. Psalm 91, here's what it says. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust Him. For He will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. He will cover you with His feathers. He will shelter you with His wings. His faithful promises are your armor and protection. Do not be afraid of the terrors of the night, nor the arrow that flies in the day. Do not dread the diseases that stalks in the darkness, nor the disaster that strikes at midday. Though 1,000 fall at your side or 10,000 are dying around you, these evils will not touch you. Just open your eyes and see how the wicked are punished. If you make the Lord your refuge, if you make the Most High your shelter, no evil will conquer you. No plague will come near your home, for He will order His angels to protect you wherever you go. They will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone. You will trample upon lions and cobras. You will crush fierce lions and serpents under your feet. Verse 14, the Lord says, I will rescue those who love me. I will protect those who trust in my name. When they call on me, I will answer. I will be with them in trouble. I will rescue and honor them. I will reward them with a long life and give them my salvation. Isn't that beautiful? Some beautiful promises, some beautiful thoughts. So here's what we see. In Psalm 91, we're going to spend a bit of time just camping out on those first few verses. Because whoever's writing this, the psalmist, he places a lot of focus and emphasis on that. He comes back to that sort of halfway through his psalm, because if we can understand this, if we can make sense of this introduction that he gives, if we can actually apply that, then the rest of the psalm, well, that's just a consequence. That's just an outflow. That just happens because. And so I want us to camp out there and just pull that apart, make sense of it, and see how we can apply that in our lives today. And here's where the psalmist starts. Here's what he says. Verse 91, those who live. Some other translations start off by saying whoever. Whoever lives, whoever dwells. And the first point I want to make on that is the whoever. What this blessing, what this promise, what this picture of being at home with God, being in a place where there is peace, being in a place where there is comfort, being in a place where there is rest, that is open and extended to all of us. That is open and extended to you and I. That is open and extended to whoever. Immediately, God here puts no condition on who comes to him. There is nothing that we need to have or nothing that we need to bring, nothing that we need to give in coming to the presence of God. Did you hear me? There is no condition. It says whoever, those who. And I want us to understand that when we start off. This is an invitation to whoever. Each and every one of us. He starts off making that clear. Whoever. Then he says, whoever lives, or other translations use the word whoever dwells, whoever camps, whoever lives in the presence of the Most High God, whoever remains, abides, does life, pursues God, the Most High God, whoever lives, camps in that place where God is, whoever makes it their desire, their life's purpose to be near God. This invitation is for everyone, and it says, this is where we live. And what I want to contrast that with, it says, this is not just a partial experience. This is not just a once a week thing. This is not just a once a year thing, maybe at Easter and Christmas. What the author is inviting us into, he says, whoever camps, lives, makes it all of their life to be in the presence of the Most High God. And he carries on, in the shelter of the Almighty. The Hebrew word here, shelter, is also translated the secret place. Whoever dwells in the secret place of the Most High God, or whoever is in the hiding place of the Most High God. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I had 3 older brothers, and that often meant trouble and tribulation in my life. I had parents who didn't understand me and would often discipline me for certain things. And there was a place in our home. It was my secret place. It was my hiding place. It was a linen cupboard, a walk-in linen cupboard. And my mom would stack all the, extra linen, extra blankets on the shelves. But then there was a big space where we often used to have people camping out at our house. Our home was nicknamed around the area the Hurlow Hotel, because whoever came by would just stay at our place. And so there was a whole lot of mattresses about 5 or 6 mattresses that were also stored in this linen cupboard. So it made a great hiding place. Whenever I wanted to get away from my brothers, whenever I wanted to escape the persecution at home, I would go into this linen cupboard and I'd close the door. Sometimes I'd lock the door when the key was there. My mum figured out that I'd do that, so she took the key away. But this was my safe place. This was my shelter. This was my hiding place. And this is the kind of picture that the psalmist is trying to create. He says, whoever, this invitation is open to all, lives, and this is a whole of life experience in that hiding place, in that secret place of the Most High God. And what I experienced in this hiding place was, I was at peace. It was a shelter, a freedom from whatever I felt was troubling me. It was a place where I could go and cry if I wanted to cry and my brothers wouldn't tease me. It was a place where I could go and just rest from whatever was happening around me. And it's sometimes a place where I fell asleep if I was in there too long. I remember one time I fell asleep and the family couldn't find me because I'd hid really well underneath all the mattresses. I remember before I fell asleep, one of my brothers coming in and sort of jumping on the mattresses to feel if I was there. But he obviously didn't feel that I was there, and they kept looking, couldn't find me. And eventually I woke up and came out and they're like, Norman's alive. But it was a place where you could just rest and be at peace. Where's that for you? I don't know if any of you have had a place like that. I don't know if you still have a place like that. But this is the image that the psalmist is trying to conjure up when it's talking about God, who God is and who God can be for us. And that secret place, that hiding place with God, what that looks like and what that can be. He carries on and he says, those who live in the shelter, in this hiding place of the Most High God, will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I love how rest is a result. Rest is a consequence of pursuing the presence of God, of pursuing that place with God. Rest is a byproduct of us being in that close relation to the Most High God. And why I love this and why I think it's important for us, because here at Papster, something that we celebrate, something that we hold up, and something that we call and challenge each and every person to, is to seek and pursue a relationship with God. First and foremost, above everything else, seek and pursue a relationship with God. Know that God is love and He wants to be in relationship with you. And while we are a Sabbath-keeping Christian church, sometimes people have asked, well, why don't you guys talk more about the Sabbath? Or why don't you guys hold that out more? And to me, this psalm here points out a beautiful picture of why, first and foremost, what we do is hold up God and call each and every one into a relationship with God. Because what it points to, and this is the whole of the Bible and these verses as well, is that rest. That rest is a byproduct of being in the presence of God. That rest is it just happens because we are in the shelter of the Almighty. So instead of us thinking that we need to pursue rest, instead of us thinking that we need to uplift or hold or try and chase after that rest, the Bible says, no. What I want you guys to understand is you need to pursue and be in the presence of God. The rest is a byproduct. The rest that comes follows. The rest is because you have been in that secret place with God. I love the image and picture it gives there. It says, those who find themselves in the hiding place of God, they rest in the shadow of the Almighty. The idea of a shadow also communicates closeness. You can only be in something's shadow if you are near or close to it. It's a beautiful picture. This place of peace, this place of rest. He carries on and says, "This I declare about the Lord," or some other translations say, "This then is what I'll say. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He alone is my God, and I trust him." Here's another important point. Those that find this place, those who are at peace, have learned a very important thing. They've learned to trust God. They've learned to take God at his word. They've learned to, and we know from human relationships, we know from our experiences that trust only comes as we get closer to the person that we're learning to trust. Trust only comes as we exercise our faith in the person that we are trusting, if they've shown that to be true, and if we understand and get to know who they are. That's when we trust them more. And so here the author is saying this place of peace, this sense of home, this sense of this is where I belong, comes because, once again, our closeness and relationship to God. And we've learned to know him and put our faith and apply what he says he will do. And we've put our trust in that, and we've seen that he is faithful. Most of our pain, I know this to be true in my experience, most of our pain, most of our suffering, most of our hurt, most of our heartache come because of a lack of trust, come as a result of mistrust. I know when I look at the choices in my life, some of the choices, the roads I've walked down, when you look back, you go, why? Why did you do that? My parents told me, my friends around me told me, I read and saw in the Word of God, don't do this. But I still did, and it led to a place of pain, hurt, and suffering. And as we look around, we can see that of our human experience, most of the pain and suffering that we often experience is at the hand of other human beings. Most of the pain and suffering in the world is at the hand of other human beings, whether it be fighting over territory, whether it be fighting over religion, whether it be fighting within relationships, whether it be abuse within relationships, which are all things which are contrary to what God has called us to, what God has shown and revealed to us how to live. And so that's why the only reason why we walk down that road and why we experience that pain and suffering is because we don't trust that what God has called us to is actually going to be the best for us, and we do our own thing. And it often leads to the place of pain, hurt, and heartache. So much of our hurt comes from mistrust. And so here the author says the person who experiences that peace has learned how to trust that what God says is good, what God calls us to is going to be the best thing for our life. Trust in God. He then, what is interesting in these first few verses, and what helps understand why the author here trusted God, what gives us a sense that he knew who God was, is he mentions 4 different names for God. 4 different names. That must have hurt. 4 different names for God. He starts off, and this is in your Bibles, the first name for God is the word we see there, Most High. It's the word Elyon. He calls God the Elyon, the Most High God. The concept or idea behind this is that God is above all else. God owns everything. Everything in this world, all the possessions of this world are owned by God. Therefore, he is the Most High One, the greatest one. The Hebrew word Elyon. It speaks to possession. I can trust this God because everything is in his possession. The next name for God that he gives is El Shaddai. And this word speaks to God who is all sufficient, the God who is almighty, the God who will provide for everything that I need. So he says, I've learned to trust this God because I've seen his provision in my life. He's the one who owns everything. He has all possessions. He's El Yon. He's the one who provides what I need. He's El Shaddai. And then he says, the next name he gives for God, he says, he is Yahweh, which throughout the Hebrew Bible is the covenant name for God, the personal name for God. This is the God who has shown himself to be true through his covenant promises. He says, I trust in Yahweh because his promises are true. So he says, I realize this God possesses everything and everything is his. I realize this God provides for my needs, and I realize this God's promises are true. Then the next God or name for God is Elohim. And this is the God who created. This is the name for God given in Genesis. This is the God who is all-powerful. And so he introduces these 4 ideas or concepts of God, and he says, I've come to know God to be the one who possesses all, the one who provides, the one whose promises are true, and the one who is powerful in my life and in our world. That's how I've come to know him. That's why I trust in him. As I've spent my life in that secret place with God, I've come to know him as this. As we relate to God and as we encounter God, sometimes we acknowledge these names of God speak to things in our life that we often long for, that we often yearn for, that we often struggle with. We know one of the prevailing things in our world or philosophies that underlie everything that happens in our world is materialism. The love of possessions, the love of things. And so often the pursuits that lead us to a place of pain and hurt are pursuing these, is because we're pursuing stuff, we're pursuing things. And here he said, I've learned to see that God, you are the one who possesses everything. You are the one who owns everything. I don't need to carry on that pursuit. And in his relating to God, maybe the question is not, God, can I possess more? But God, can I learn to leave that possessing to you? And can I learn to be content and trust that the God who possesses all will give me what I need? And then he says, God is the provider. That's something that we often is at the heart of whatever sometimes entangles and traps us. We want to provide for the people around us. We want to provide for our own needs. We want to provide for what satisfies us. And this is one of the key ideas behind the Sabbath and behind getting to know this God. He says, no, this God is the provider. This God is the one who will provide what you need. Maybe not what you want, but what you need. And then so often in life, our pain and hurt, or we pursue someone that can give us a promise, something that promises to fulfill us, something that promises to give us hope. And often we get tripped up because we put our faith in and believe the promises of what can never satisfy. And here the author says, no, I've learned that it's only God, only Yahweh who is faithful. His promises are true. And then many of us, and this is very true for men, we get caught up in this idea of power and control. And God says, rest in me. I am Elohim. I am the all-powerful. You don't need to try and be that in your own life. Have you learned to trust in this God? The passage then carries on, and it says what this means, what this looks like, how this unfolds in our life. So God says, for I will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. It mentions a whole lot of other things that God will rescue us from, but everything else it mentions in this chapter looks at those two ideas. I'll rescue from every trap, which is the evil intent or the deliberate attacks that come against you. I'll rescue you from people's deliberate intent, and I'll save you from disease, from the things that kind of happen through the natural world, the natural order. Now, I want to ask you a question. How many of you believe in God? Okay. How many of you have experienced pain and hurt because of other people's actions towards you? How many of you have struggled with disease or been affected by natural disasters in this world? How many of you have suffered with that? So how do we understand this? How do we relate to this? What does this mean? Because all of us have said, God, we do pursue you. We do believe in you. We do want to live in your presence. So what does it mean when God says, well, I'll shelter you from these things. I'll protect you from these things. But yet our experience, we still suffer. We still are ensnared by people harming us. What does this mean? How do we relate to this? Before I answer that, I want to carry on and quickly look over the other few verses, because I believe God answers it right at the end. But it carries on looking at these two ideas, and it says, He will cover you with His feathers, He will shelter you with His wings, His faithful promises are your armor and protection. This is a beautiful reality. It's a beautiful picture of how God will take care of us and look after us. Then he carries on, and this is in verse 5. Do not be afraid of the terrors by night or the arrows that fly by day. Do not dread the disease that stalks in the darkness or disasters that strike at midday. Two things I want us to note from those verses. He says, because I am your God, because you've learned to live in my presence, I will protect you from these things, but more than that, don't fear. And then it contrasts fear and it says, don't dread. And in these verses, it uses two contexts. It says, the terrors at night or the arrows by day or the disasters in the darkness or the plagues in midday. So he's kind of saying in every area of life, in every setting, whether it be in a dark space, whether it be in a light space, whether it be at night, whether it be your day, don't fear, don't dread. I am the God who possesses everything. I'm the God who provides everything. I'm the God who has promised. I'm the God who is all-powerful. So rest in that and don't be overcome with fear and dread. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, it says, for God has given us a spirit not of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. God's purpose is not that when we see these things, when things happen to us, that we're overcome by fear or dread. He carries on and he says, though thousands fall at your side, 10,000s are dying around you. And being a poem, being a song, this is metaphorical. It's saying, though heaps of things are going on, these evils will not touch you. And here I believe he's hinting at what it means to be under the protection of God, what it means for God to shelter and shield us. He says, these evils, evil intent will not touch you. Just open your eyes. Then he carries on in verse 9. If you make the Lord your refuge, and here he's harking back to that reality. If you understand, if you know, if you apply this, if you make the Lord your refuge, if you make the Most High your shelter, no evil will conquer you, no plague will come near your home. For he will order his angels to protect you wherever you go. He will hold you up with his hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone. You will trample on lions and cobras. You will crush fierce lions and serpents under your feet. He says that no evil will conquer you. He talks about overcoming or crushing lions and serpents. What is that about? You know, there are some Christian groups that take this literally. I don't know if you've ever heard of them or seen them. And in their services, and I wondered it might be a good thing for us to do. No, I don't think so. They have rattlesnakes, and they bring in rattlesnakes and they put them down on the ground. And the pastor will read these verses and he'll say, God has said, if you trust him, if you have faith in him, you'll pick that snake up and nothing will happen to you. You will stand on its... Have any of you heard of these guys? Yep. Now, I noticed a number of the elders and the pastor, they have a few fingers missing and a few things going on because they've been bitten. That snake acts like a snake. And when they go and pick it up, it bites them. So how do we understand this? What do we see God to be saying? Well, when I look at it and how I think God is wanting us to apply this is in a spiritual context. Whenever we look, he talks about what he will do and how he will help us overcome. Often in prophecy, in the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, it talks about serpents and lions and wild animals in the sense of the evil forces or the attacks of the devil that come against us. And so here what God is referring to, what God is telling us is, even right in the beginning where it said, and you won't be caught by the fowler's snare, I think is how one version puts it, how it was expressed here in verse 3, he'll rescue you from every trap. The Bible constantly talks about how it is Satan is the one who tries to trap and get us to fall and stumble and overcome us with the evil. And that's where also it says, you will not be overcome with evil. Or he says, evil will not conquer you. Notice that these verses don't say that you won't experience any of that. Notice that it says you won't sometimes come under the attack or influence of that. It just says it won't conquer you. Another version says it won't overpower you. So how I think we best understand and relate to this, God is saying, you know what? In this life, in the spiritual sense, if you remain with me, if you dwell in my presence, if you get to know me as the God who has all possessions, is your provider, the God who is faithful to his promises, and the God who is all powerful, then nothing any evil person or Satan throws against you will be able to harm your inner being, will be able to harm or pull you away from you, or will be able to influence you to leave this place of safety, this place of refuge, this place where you find peace, won't be able to destroy you. Because here's what the Bible does teach. Here's what the Bible does say, and here's what the Bible never promises. The Bible does teach that we still experience difficult things. The Bible does teach that we still come under attack. And while some of these attacks are hard and they get us down, the Bible always promises, I will not let it overcome you. I will not let it pull you down if you will do life with me. And even God's most faithful servants in the Bible, we see how often they came under attack. They were persecuted by people. They suffered greatly. But in terms of their soul, in terms of their inner being, they were always in a place where they depended and trusted on God, were at peace, and could find comfort, could find joy. I remember especially the Apostle Paul. He writes a beautiful piece in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, where he talks about and he lists all the things that happened to him, all the things that he experienced and went through. He says, and we read these stories in Acts. You know, he was stoned while trying to share the love of God, while trying to communicate the gospel. He was stoned, he was put in prison, he was flogged how many times to the point of death, he was shipwrecked. All these things happened. And if we think about it, because this is how we as human beings often reason. We think, you know, God, if I am faithful to you, if I, and this in a way almost even reads like that, but God, if I just do what you ask, then none of these things will happen to me. God, if I order my life according to your way, then surely I will be immune from any of these trials or troubles. And so if that is how we think, and if that is what the Bible taught, then surely Paul, of all the believers of God, he was, we could say, the most faithful. He was the most zealous. He was the most fervent in his faith. He walked with the Spirit wherever he went, yet he tells about all these things that he had to go through, all these sufferings that he had to experience. And in this very same chapter, he says, God even gave him, or he had something that he called a thorn in his flesh, that he pled with God, said, God, please take this from me. Please remove this from me. I can't handle this. I can't experience the suffering. But he said, God's reply came like this: my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And so Paul carries on and says, because of that, I won't boast in what I've done or the good things I do, but I will glory in my suffering so that the power of Christ may be seen and made known to me and through me. And so we see that God never promises his people are going to have an easy or a safe ride. What he does promise is that if we will remain in his presence, if we'll learn how to hide in the shelter of the Most High, that these will not overcome us, that these will not get us down, that the spiritual evils will not be able to move us or pull us away from the presence of God. And here's how he closes. Here's how he closes. Verse 14, the Lord says, I will rescue those who love me. I'll protect those who trust in my name. When they call on me, I will answer. I will be with them in trouble. I will rescue and honor them. I will reward them with long life and give them my salvation. And I love how he says there, I will be with them in trouble. In other words, God, even here in that final promise, he's not saying, in my house, when you come home, when you're in my presence, you're never going to experience trouble. He says, no, but in that trouble, I will be with you. The one who owns everything, who has all possession, the one who is the provider, the one who is faithful to his promise, and the one who is all powerful, I will be with you. No matter what you go through, no matter what you face, you're not going to need to do it alone. And that is what it means. That is what it looks like. That is what it feels to be home, to be in God's presence. A beautiful phrase that sums this up that I've heard before. It says, peace is not the absence of trouble, but peace is the presence of God. Peace is not the absence of trouble. Peace